When peace feels unfamiliar, restoration begins here. This is P.I.P.E Podcast. Welcome back to P.I.P.E Podcast. I'm your host, Kizia Mayfield, and I'm really glad you're here today. A few days ago, I found something I had completely forgotten about. It was an old blog post I wrote in 2016. 10 years ago. I opened it, started reading, and honestly, I just sat there. It's not because I remembered the pain. I definitely remember the pain. I sat there because I realized I'd spent the last 10 years discovering the answer to the questions I was asking. Back then, I thought I was asking God one question. Is God really good? Today, I don't think that was the real question at all. I think I was asking, can I trust his heart? There is a big difference. See, in 2016, my life looked really good from the outside. I had worked incredibly hard. I was fit and dressed well. My kids always looked beautiful. My home looked beautiful. And people would have looked at my life and thought, she's got it together. But they didn't know what it felt like to be me. Because while my outside looked beautiful, my inside still felt shattered. In that blog, I described myself as stained glass. I said I didn't want to be stained glass anymore. I just want to be whole. And if I'm honest, I don't think I even knew what whole meant. I thought wholeness meant looking like none of it had ever happened. I wanted God to erase every scar and every memory, every trigger, every wound. I wanted him to put me back into the garden. Back before the abuse, before the rejection, before the fear, before shame. I wanted all my hard work to erase a hard world. I had done everything I knew to do. I had worked harder than most people around me. I had survived. I had obeyed. I had built a beautiful life. So why? Why did I still feel broken? I remember writing these words. A good father doesn't require me to work to be good to me. When I read that, I cried. Because somehow, 10 years ago, my heart already knew something my mind couldn't believe. I knew what a good father should be. I just wasn't convinced God was that father. I kept waiting for him to prove it. In that same blog, I wrote something that honestly surprised me. I said, I want God to do something so big, so personal, that I know why he chose me. When I read that, I realized I wasn't asking for a miracle. I was asking for evidence. Evidence that I mattered. Evidence that I had been chosen. Evidence that I wasn't forgotten. I don't think I wanted a platform. I don't think I even wanted significance. I think I wanted certainty. I wanted to know that the Father saw me. In church, I watched people receive incredible prophetic words. People would stand in front of the church and someone would speak over their life. People would talk about these incredible encounters with God. I had beautiful moments with him too, but mine were private, sacred moments. But somewhere inside of me, I quietly believed that if God really wanted me, surely he would do something big, something undeniable, something everyone could see. And looking back, I realized I was measuring his love by visible evidence. And underneath all of that was just a little girl asking one question. Father, would you choose me too? There was another sentence in that blog that stopped me this week. I wrote, I've done some pretty big things with a small God. 10 years ago, I thought my problem was that my view of God's power was too small. Today, I think my view of his heart was too small because I never doubted he was powerful. I doubted whether he was personally good to me, whether he delighted in me, whether he really wanted me. I think that's the question I carried for most of my life. Not, does God exist? Not, is he powerful? But, am I really wanted? And I think that question shaped almost everything I did. It shaped the way I worked, the way I parented, the way I served, the way I viewed myself, the way I viewed God. I spent years trying to become the woman I thought he would finally delight in. What I didn't realize was I wasn't really looking for perfection. I was looking for peace. And I thought if I became beautiful enough and disciplined enough, spiritual enough, successful enough, eventually my inside would finally look like my outside. I was chasing a version of myself that never existed. And that realization changed everything because it forced me to ask a different question. What if God wasn't trying to make me perfect? What if he was trying to show me his heart? So, what happened over the next 10 years? Did God answer all of my prayers? No. Did life suddenly become easy? Absolutely not. In fact, life got harder in ways I never imagined. There were losses and disappointments, questions I still can't answer. There were seasons where I honestly wondered if I knew God at all. Something happened that completely changed how I saw my own story. I realized I had been asking God for the wrong miracle. For years, I thought healing meant becoming the woman I would have been if none of it had ever happened. I wanted the abuse erased, the rejection erased, the fear erased, the anxiety erased. I wanted God to make me look like Genesis 2 again, like the fall never happened, like I had never tasted evil, like my inside could finally match the picture I'd worked so hard to create on the outside. I thought if I prayed enough and healed enough and worked hard enough, obeyed enough, eventually I would become whole. But then someone asked me a question. Did you want healing or did you want your innocence back? I had never thought about it in that way. 10 years ago, I would have answered without hesitation. Healing. Of course, healing. But today, I think the answer is different. Because once you've lived in a world, you can never unlearn it. Once you've seen abuse, you can't unknow abuse. Once you've experienced betrayal, you can't unknow betrayal. And once you've watched people you love suffer, you can't unknow suffering. The box is shattered. You don't get to go back. And that's when I realized I wasn't asking God for healing. I was asking him to put me back into the garden, back before the knowledge of good and evil, back before trauma and before fear, before shame. But history doesn't move backwards. God never promised to take us back to Eden. He promised that one day he would make all things new. Those are not the same thing. And somehow, that realization brought me peace because I finally stopped trying to work my way back to a life that no longer existed. There was another question someone asked me, and honestly, it was one of the hardest questions I've ever answered. They asked, would you remove your scars today if it meant losing what they've taught you about the Father? For a long time, I thought Christians were supposed to answer no. Like somehow we're supposed to be grateful for every terrible thing that happened. But that's not my answer. My answer is yes, I would erase the abuse. I'd erase the fear. I'd erase the rejection. I would erase the nights that little girl cried herself to sleep. I'd erase the ways my own children have been affected by wounds I was still carrying. Because I don't believe God wanted those things for me. I don't believe trauma is his design. I don't believe evil is his lesson plan. But something happened a few years ago that completely changed how I thought about all of this. I had met a young woman at a healing seminar, and we started talking, and I asked her what kind of trauma she experienced growing up. She looked at me and just smiled, said, honestly, I really haven't. She had a loving mom and a loving dad and a safe home and grandparents and family who adored her. She wasn't pretending life had been perfect, but compared to my story, it was incredibly healthy. And what struck me wasn't jealousy. It was realization. She knew the Father's love deeply, not because she survived trauma, but because she experienced healthy love. That changed me because I realized something I'd believed for years wasn't actually true. Trauma doesn't make you know God better. Sometimes it makes him harder to trust. I don't celebrate what happened to me. I celebrate what God has redeemed. And those are very different things. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, something else started changing. Not just how I saw God, how I saw myself. 10 years ago, my outside and my inside were telling two very different stories. I wanted everyone to believe I had it together, not because I was fake, because I desperately wanted it to be true. Today, I'm not trying to convince anyone I'm perfect. I don't care if I spill coffee on my shirts. I don't care if my outfit isn't perfect. I don't care if I make a mistake. I don't care if my body doesn't look the way it did when I was 30. Life has happened. I've been hurt, and I've laughed, and I've cried. I've failed. And honestly, I'm okay with people seeing that now. If someone asks me, how are you? I no longer automatically say, I'm fine. I actually stop and I think about it. I ask myself, how am I really? And sometimes that answer isn't comfortable, but it's true. And I've learned something. Truth brings freedom, and pretending never did. I used to think healing meant becoming perfect. Today, I think healing means I no longer have to hide, because perfection always hides. Love doesn't. And for the first time in my life, I realized something I never saw in 2016. Maybe God wasn't asking me to become someone else. Maybe he was inviting the real me to come out of hiding. And that's when I finally began to understand. The Father I'd been looking for had been walking toward me all along. So, did I ever get the answer? Did God ever do the big thing I asked him to do, the grand gesture, the undeniable proof, the moment where I would never question his love again? The answer is Yes, just not the way I expected. For years, I thought I was waiting for one unforgettable moment, one miracle, one prophetic word, one extraordinary experience that would finally convince me. Kizia, I chose you. But somewhere over the last 10 years, I've realized something. I wasn't looking for a miracle. I was looking for evidence. Evidence that I mattered. Evidence that my life wasn't in vain. Evidence that I had been chosen. Because if I'm honest, I think my greatest fear wasn't that God would leave me. I think my greatest fear is that He would never fully choose me. When you've lived through abuse and rejection, being abandoned, being misunderstood, being controlled, it's very easy to begin believing one lie. Maybe I'm just too much, too broken, too emotional, too difficult, too damaged. Maybe people don't leave because life is hard. Maybe they leave because of me. That lie followed me into my relationship with God. I didn't question His power. I questioned whether His heart was for me. Looking back, I think that's why purpose became so important to me, and legacy became so important. Significance became so important. I thought I wanted God to use me. Today, I think I understand what I was really asking. I wasn't asking for influence. I was asking, Father, does my life matter to you? Would you choose me too? And here's what I've discovered. The Father was never waiting to choose me. He already had. Before I accomplished anything, before I survived anything, before I built anything, before anyone knew my name, before I ever questioned Him, before I loved Him, He had already chosen me. Jesus says, "You did not choose me, but I chose you." Do you know what changed me? It wasn't one spectacular miracle. It wasn't one unforgettable moment. It was looking back over 10 years and realizing He never left. There wasn't one giant display of His love. There were thousands of quiet moments, moments I almost missed because they weren't dramatic enough. He was there when I couldn't feel Him. He was there when I doubted Him. He was there when I walked away. He was there when I came back. He was there while I was trying to earn what He had already given me. The Father I was asking to reveal Himself had been walking beside me all along. And today, if I could sit beside the woman who wrote that blog, I don't think I'd try to answer every question. I don't think I'd explain suffering. I don't think I would even tell her everything is going to work out. I think I would simply hold her hand and I'd say, "You're asking God to become a father. He already is. One day, you're going to discover He wasn't waiting for you to become whole before He loved you. His love is what you've been making. His love is what's been making you whole all along." Back then, I thought wholeness meant looking like none of it had ever happened. Today, I think wholeness means there's no part of me I'm afraid to bring before my Father. Not my scars, not my questions, not my failures, not my grief, not my doubts. Just all of me. Because I've finally learned something. The Father isn't asking for the version of me that was never hurt. He was asking for the real me, the woman who's still healing, the woman who still has questions, the woman who still wishes some things had never happened, the woman who's learning to trust him one day at a time. That's the daughter he wants. There are still days I wish none of it had happened. I still wish that little girl had never been abused. I still wish my children had never felt the ripple effects of my pain. I don't think those wishes make my face smaller. I think they make me. But today, I no longer measure God's goodness by whether he erased my scars. I measured it by the fact that he never stopped meeting me in them. 10 years ago, I wanted my life to be a perfect picture. Today, I have a different prayer. Father, make my heart look like yours. Because if people leave my home, my conversations, my life, I don't need them to think I'm impressive. I don't need them to think I have it all together. I don't need them to remember my story. I want them to leave knowing something about you. I want them to experience the kind of father I spent years searching for. A father who isn't afraid of broken people. A father who isn't waiting for perfection. A father who doesn't love us because we've earned it. A father who runs towards us. A father who stays. Maybe that's the answer I was looking for all along. Not, is God good? But the Father is better than I knew. Thank you for sitting with me today. If you're listening and you're carrying questions that you've been afraid to ask, I hope you know you're not alone. God has never been afraid of honest questions. In fact, some of the deepest things he has taught me began with one. This is P.I.P.E. Plug into positive energy. And until next time, remember this. The Father you may still be asking to reveal himself may already be walking beside you. You just haven't recognized his footsteps yet. Thank you for sitting with us today, where restoration begins.